First of all, welcome to PEAK. Those of you that haven't met me, my name's Christine Hubble. I'm Head of Leadership Solutions at Marshall McAdam, and we are a business that specialises in the technology space in terms of recruiting great talent, but we also get to connect with people on a personal level, and PEAK was set up just to help the women we were talking to realise there's a lot more of you than you think in the market, in the leadership space. So the start of PEAK was about connecting people, giving a safe environment to share ideas and learn from each other. So that's what we're going to try and enable a little bit more of today. So as Vicky said, Margaret was on a podcast through a mutual friend of Vicky and I, and her message really connected, and I thought it would add value to you as a group. So we've asked her to come along and just to help share some of her expertise and her learnings, but we want this to be interactive. Our aim is to really keep us all together in the group, but to break us into a couple of sections from this session so that we can stop with the screen presenting. We can ask people just what they're finding and learning and what their experience has been, and then we can move into the second phase of the session today. So we will be a little bit stop-start, but I think it will be more effective for everybody. So yeah, we may get some extra people joining. I've just closed down the waiting room so people can, I'm hoping that means that they can just join. We'll find out if we get text messages saying how do we get in, but there we go. So first of all, obviously, as we usually do, I'd like to just talk through the recognition as we do of the country. So look, in spirit of reconciliation, PEAK acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. And I think that's an important thing that we should and do recognise. Vicky and most of the ladies at Marshall McAdam and I were at a women's event the other week, and there was a fabulous lady who presented, and she had everybody up and singing, and we thought that would probably take up half of our session today, so we'll go with the simple version. So also what I'd like to do is introduce you to our presenter today. That's Margaret. Margaret, if you could let yourself be known to everybody.
Hi.
Margaret Aboody. Just to give a quick introduction, Margaret is a qualified psychologist. She's the director of Luemo, which is an organisation that she established. And I'm reading a little bit here, but to provide practical mental health and well-being for workplaces. And that's where I thought it really connected for this leadership group. Her background has been GM People and Culture, a manager at KPMG. She's qualified through the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and today we're going to hear a talk about really that ability to work with businesses to help them understand the value of well-being and the commercial value of investing in that. So that's something that she's really focused on as well. So that's a formal introduction, but I'll let Margaret give you a little bit more of her background. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicky, and hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. It's amazing that you can get a group of senior women in the IT sector together to have a conversation about wellbeing leadership. And I'm privileged to be here, so thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to sharing a bit of information with you today and some of our models and that sort of thing. I like to put things into models and use graphics and that sort of thing. It helps people remember things. And we're also going to spend some time workshopping two key concepts today around connection and around modelling well-being, so that you can take some ideas away from your peers here. So I know I'm going to be doing a lot of talking, but I think that the real value also is going to come from you and sharing what you're experiencing in your workplaces in terms of these elements, and sharing with each other how you're going about doing it, because wellbeing leadership is something that we can all do and we should all be doing. And obviously you all think it's pretty important because you've all rolled in for our webinar today, which is great. Well, I tell you what, shall we go to the presentation or?
Yeah, I was just going to say, but then I put myself on mute, which didn't help. Why don't I share screen and then we can
let's get into the materials.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And of course, as I think, Vicky, did you say that at any time people can put questions or things into the chat box?
Absolutely. So everybody here should know how to use Zoom, but if you don't, there is a comment section, which is called the chat section, where you can put your questions up. Sorry, my phone just fell over and the dog's barking. Multitasking. So, and I can then call them out, or Margaret can see them.
Oh, so I'll see the chat box, will it?
I would have thought so, yes.
Okay. All right. If I look like I'm not seeing it, you can pipe up and...
Vicky will just keep an eye on it for you, or I will, and then if we see something, we will basically raise it for you as we go.
Okay, great. Thank you. So today our topic that we're going to be talking about is around what do wellbeing leaders do? And this is a topic I talk about a lot. I think Vicky talked a little bit about the business that I have that is called Luemo Workplace Wellbeing, which is a business that focuses on helping all businesses in a practical way, both small and large, to have their own, build their own wellbeing culture. And we've got lots of resources, and we run workshops, and we've got videos and all sorts of things to help businesses gain that traction and keep up momentum and make it easier, because I think a lot of businesses don't do that simply because it seems like a big job for them. So that's what Luemo does. What I've found is, and what I'm increasingly doing, is talking to groups like you and working with the senior leadership teams in businesses around what do wellbeing leaders do? How do you be a wellbeing leader? What is the business case for wellbeing leadership, and how do you articulate that at the boardroom table? And also increasingly working with leaders on their own wellbeing and doing some personal planning, particularly for executives. So what we're going to be going through today is a tiny, I guess, a bit of a glimpse into some of those leadership concepts around wellbeing in the workplace. That's good. Thank you. That's our first slide. I like to put this up and for people to have a look at this, because I think this really resonates with people as to why wellbeing is so important. Why it's not only why it's important in businesses, but why it's important in our lives. Like, people who have good levels or high levels of well-being are happier, they live longer, they have better relationships and better health. Now, in the workplace, this translates to markers around better productivity, better engagement, and higher levels of creativity and innovation. So if we just have a look at this continuum that we've got up here at the moment. So continuums, as you know, it means we can move up and down. And we all can relate to being at certain parts over time and through our life at different parts of that continuum. And of course, we'd like to be spending most of our time up on the right-hand side in that well and thriving space, okay? And less time down in that crisis and struggling space, or even in that middle around that surviving. We've heard a lot of use of that word languishing in the media, and that's what I'd call that surviving, where a lot of leaders in the workplace have really been worn down by this long-term impact of the pandemic. And They're still turning up at work, but they are worried, they are irritable, and they're exhausted, they're distracted, and they're withdrawn. So, and I think, Vicky, I don't know if we talked about it earlier today, but there's a report that came out from McKinsey's that talked about women and the impact of the pandemic and the with their employees leaning on them for support. And this has really started burning out women, and women are really bearing the brunt more so than male leaders when it comes to supporting employees who are reaching out for personal help. Okay, so that's one of the reasons also why we want to talk about personal wellbeing today. So sometimes we can sit here and go, well, where am I on here at the moment? Where is my team? Like, where do I want my team to be? And then how much more productive are you when you're up in that well and thriving area? How much better are you at connecting with your team, dealing with those tricky clients? And how much better are your employees? How much more productive are people when they're up there on that well and thriving? And this is where this really illustrates the productivity benefits of businesses who focus on keeping their employees up here on the well and thriving side. You'd rather have 10 people in a team who are up this end on the right-hand side of the continuum than 20 people who are around that surviving and struggling area. Would you agree? No. So this is one of the reasons why it's so important. So it's a productivity issue, and it's a competitive issue, but also it's not nice to be down there on that left-hand side of the continuum. So, and as businesses, we can have an enormous impact in workplaces on where our employees are on this continuum, whether the stresses are coming from inside the organisation or if they are a personal stressor. Either way, you might not have created the personal stressor outside the workplace, but it will be having an impact on you and your business. And so focusing on supporting your employees in the workplace pays dividends. And through education and all sorts of other interventions, we can have an impact up here, up and moving people up into the well and thriving. I get quite frustrated sometimes when I see so much talk around the mental health crisis in Australia, and we need more funding for this, that, and the other thing. And we do, and there are not enough psychologists. It takes a long time to get an appointment with a counsellor these days. Our mental health wards are underfunded and all of that sort of thing. And we need those services. But when they're intervening, that's the equivalent of like putting a bandage on the injury that's already occurred. And I think where real change needs to start taking place is in our homes, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our sporting clubs, in our churches, in all sorts of social groups. And the workplace is one of the best, most cohesive places where we can have an impact on individuals' mental health and wellbeing. So this is where I think organisations have an enormous opportunity to step up and make a difference. So that's the continuum. Shall we move on to the next? Or has anyone got any questions or comments around that?
Possibly just not yet, because obviously we will have a time for a break in a little while, but Vicky will keep an eye on that. Margaret, before we just move on, I was just reminded of the story you told us about where organisations were at around this wellness investment at the early part of your career. Do you want to share that a little bit with the team before we look at how to be a wellbeing leader?
I was thinking about this little story, and when I could say it, I was going to say it at the beginning, because I know you thought it would be quite illustrative perhaps to the members here today. So I was telling Vicky and Christine about when back in quite a while ago, when I was what I would call a baby HR consultant. So I've worked in the area of people my whole career, and I was working in more of an employee relations and industrial relations style role. And then I moved into more generalist HR consulting, and then now I'm focusing on wellness. But back then, I was what I call a fresh and young and quite excitable little HR person. And I was having a meeting in a particular organisation with the CEO and the chief operating officer of this organisation. We were talking about the upcoming financial year and the line items that should be on the P&L for my area. And I said, look, I think that we probably should start putting in something here around, employee support or wellness, because, we've got people in our organisation that are coming to me and they've got anxiety or they're struggling with depression, relationship problems, drugs and alcohol, that sort of thing. And I think people are really looking for some support, and some budget around that would be really good. And the chief operating officer looked at me and he said, well, Margaret, that's why we have you, so you can fire those people. And it was, I don't know if you think that's funny or if that's abhorrent. Now, at the time...
Probably a bit of both.
It's a bit of both, isn't it? And at the time, I sort of, being a lot less experienced, and talking about wellbeing wasn't really very common back then either. I sort of thought, oh, okay, that's probably right, because the chief operating officer told me that. And I walked out of that meeting and I just felt really quite uncomfortable that I didn't know the things around the business case then, and I couldn't articulate that. But that just didn't sit right with me. I knew it was the right thing to do, that we needed to support our people and we would get better productivity out of our people and everyone would be happier. And it was the right thing to do. And so I think that was a real turning point in my career. An aha moment. And these sorts of moments are the things that bring you to where you are now. And it's really nice to see that after all these years, things have evolved, not just because of what I've done, but our community is changing, and it is becoming almost an expected. And because it is the right thing to do, and there is a great business case for it, but it is the right thing to do as well. And so this is why I started Luemo, and this is why I continue to work in this area, and why I particularly focus on leadership, because it starts with leadership. It starts with you guys who are sitting here today. It really does. That's not just a slogan. It does start with leaders. It's about leadership engagement and about leaders knowing what to do. And definitely back then, those two leaders that I had a conversation with didn't know what to do, didn't value it. And and that was a shame. And so back then I had to then go out and I kind of did a lot of wellbeing stuff by stealth, I guess. And that's how we worked our way through it and eventually got there. So,
and I think you've mentioned obviously productivity, but in the current market, it's about wellness of people first, but also about retention of people and that value of investment. So I know I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, but your next slide is really talking about how to be a wellbeing leader.
It is.
And a little bit more on that.
Yeah. Well, smart businesses are using wellbeing and wellness as a solid strategy for retention, productivity, and engagement. So I think it took a while for business to get their head around that this is not just a business risk issue. This is actually a productivity, retention, engagement, creativity, and innovation issue. So if you don't have a well workforce, you can't innovate. You're not creative. Think about that continuum again. If you want a creative, innovative, engaged workforce, particularly in the IT sector, this is what you need. They need to have good mental health and wellbeing, and it's in the business's interest to spend money on that and invest in that and pay attention to that. Yeah. So should we go to the little model that we have here? Yeah. So I've got a bit of an illustration to share with you here about what makes up a wellbeing leader. What are some of the components or some of the elements that make up wellbeing leadership? And there are 5 here. So attitude's everything. Vicky, we might just put all 5 up because then there's second. Yeah. So the attitude, the leadership attitude is number 1. Connection, that's the second one. building psychological safety, modeling your own, building your own resilience, looking after yourself and modeling that with your team. And lastly, that point around being ready to provide support and have a supportive conversation when people need that help. Okay, so the two things, I'll quickly go through all 5, but then we're really going to hone in on connection with your team and building and modeling resilience. So this attitude is everything is really the starting point for leaders. And it is your job to be a wellbeing leader. If you are in a leadership position, you need to be across this stuff. You need to be across the business case. You need to know how to articulate the benefits and the business risks when you're at the boardroom table or when you're in a senior executive meeting. You need to understand how to embed wellbeing into strategy and align it with your values. So if innovation is one of your values in your organization, how does wellness support that? Another point around that is balancing this compliance and compassion thing and understanding the commercial, risks and so forth, commercial outcomes, and understanding the legal compliance framework and having that there, but actually allowing compassion to guide you through that kind of framework. I think that's a really important thing for leaders to click into. That second one there, this is around connecting with your team and proactively initiating connection and understanding your team, knowing them on an individual basis and giving them what they need to be successful. And you're doing this proactively before a crisis happens. Staying abreast of issues and preempting any of those anxieties. So if change is coming in your organization, start talking to your people about that early. You bring it up with them, talk them through it, because if you're silent on an issue, people think that it's either not important or they'll start speculating about it themselves in their head or amongst each other. And of course, that usually ends up to be negative speculation. And then being calm and factual, sticking to the facts, getting your information from reliable sources and so forth. Those sorts of things, particularly that, preempting the fears, uncertainties and doubts and being calm and factual. I saw quite a different approaches during the pandemic. Some organizations were really on the front foot talking about, okay, there's a pandemic, this is our position, this is how we're going to do it, and communicating that sort of stuff, and particularly around vaccinations and that sort of thing. Some organizations said, we're not saying anything about vaccination and when we don't have a position on it or anything. And the employees in their organization, started speculating that, oh my God, if you're not vaccinated, you're probably going to lose your job, or those sorts of things, because the organization didn't address those fears and those anxieties in a proactive way. They remained silent on the issue. So that's a really important thing when connecting. The third one there is around building psychological safety. So wellbeing leaders do this, and they do this in a practical way. Psychological safety, you've probably heard this, you might think it's a bit of a buzzword or a buzz concept, but it's not a new concept. This first psychologists sort of started talking about this back in the 60s. It's predicated on social groups having strong connection, strong trust, and strong sense of belonging, and in a high psychological safe environment, you can take a risk and you will not be turned out of that group or humiliated or shouted down. How that translates to the workplace is that in a psychologically safe workplace, people will ask for help. They won't bury mistakes because they know if I make a mistake, I'm not going to be in trouble for that. So once again, in organizations that need high levels of innovation, they also need people to be comfortable about taking risks and questioning convention. So if you want innovation and creativity in your organization, you need to build psychological safety, because otherwise people won't take risks. People won't offer new ideas. People won't question convention because they think that they're going to be shouted down or ignored or perhaps even turned out of the group because they've gone against convention. The fourth thing there that wellbeing leaders is they do focus on their own mental health and well-being and are conscious of it. They practice good habits and they model those behaviours to their team and start conversations. And we're going to talk about that in a little more depth. And the last point there around being a well-being leader is that they are ready to have a supportive conversation. They have the courage to have a supportive conversation. And I say courage because a lot of people shy away from having supportive conversations because they feel uncomfortable, or they think it's not their job, or they don't know what to do, or they think it's none of their business, or whatever. They say, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to have that conversation. So they simply hand over a telephone number and say, oh, go and talk to a stranger. I can't.
Sorry, Margaret, I'm going to stop you there. Christine, can you mute everybody?
I'm just trying to work out how to.
There is a bit of a noise. It's not coming from mine.
I'm just going to stop sharing for a second while I work out how to do this.
Christine, if you click on the frame, you can mute the individual from the frame.
Just right mouse click on the frame. There we go.
Okay, so on that, I was talking about supportive conversations and that wellbeing leaders have these supportive conversations. So what this is all about is understanding a framework for having supportive conversations, understanding what it means to empathise, understanding what it means to provide practical support. It's not about turning people into counsellors, it's about being an empathetic leader. So they're really the 5 concepts that I like to talk to people about when we're talking about wellbeing leadership and what's important. And that's a workshop that goes on for quite a long time. So what we're going to do, and what we thought in my chats with Vicky and Christine, is that we thought we would hone in on this whole piece around connection and the piece around building and modelling your own resilience. And then perhaps we can talk through that a little bit more, and then everyone might like to contribute some ideas about how they've been addressing this going forward. Okay, so shall we, yeah, oh, that's true, yeah. Okay, so coming back to that connection piece, some of the things that I would say, some hints I would give you around that, and I think I already mentioned, is get out there and do this in a proactive way and do it before there's a crisis. There is less of an opportunity for you to connect with your team or an individual if you wait for a crisis. It's harder to connect then. So what I would say is get on the front foot with this early and start doing it early before there's a crisis. And I would also talk to you about, second thing is around this concept of having an open door policy. I hear a lot of leaders say, oh, look, I'm very approachable. My door's always open. Anyone can ask me to come and see me anytime. If they need some help, whether it's with a work problem or a personal problem, they can come and see me anytime. But the fact is, they don't do that. If they don't feel connected to you, they're not going to come to you for help, for personal help or work help. In fact, if they haven't connected with you, they'll probably hide it from you. You'll have the opposite effect. So what I want you to think about is turning the open door policy on its head. And that open door is not for you, not for them to come in to see you, but that open door is for you to get up and walk out that open door and go and connect with your people. You are the leader. You need to extend the hand first. You have to extend the hand of trust, acceptance, connection, and belonging first. Your employees won't really come to you and do that. Okay, so you're kidding yourself if you think they're going to come in that open door. So in terms of guests getting out there, what I thought we could do, Vicky, is have a bit of a conversation around people of what have they done, or what does connection mean to them, and do they practice this? Are they conscious of this?
Excuse me. I'm trying not to
I'm
cough
happy
here.
to jump in there because
Yes.
this is really resonating with me. I think that early on in my leadership journey, I was not great at this, and because I'm quite introverted and didn't really understand that my people needed me to be vulnerable. And I think being vulnerable, particularly the last 2 years, we've all had to be quite vulnerable in that, you know, we're in this situation all together and we don't know what's happening from moment to moment. And I have found that my team have been so much more open with me because they feel connected because I'm giving of myself.
Yeah.
And it's not all one way. So, you know, we've had lots of different things where, you know, we're getting information from each other. But I think being vulnerable allows them to see that I'm also a human being, not just their big boss. You know, like I don't want to be seen like that.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, I've, you know, had people tell me really quite tragic and horrible things that have happened in their lives, and they've not been my direct reports, but I think it's because they feel safe. And it's definitely something that I was not good at early on in my career, but recognizing that need to connect and just be a bit more open about myself, I think allows others in my team to do the same.
And that's classic role modeling, isn't it? Thank you for sharing that, Gabrielle. That is classic role modeling. And modeling vulnerability is a biggie, you know, saying that sometimes, oh, I'm struggling too, or I need help. That's a really good one. Thank you. Sorry.
And I think I was just going to say, I think it's something that came through early on as where women were connecting really well with their people because they were more open to share the vulnerability. But equally early on, we found that at first when people were seeing their CEOs in casual dress working from home with the dog running by, that connection started to open up. I suppose it'd be a bit interesting to see if anyone can help us understand what other tactics, or what has worked, what by default has just happened to work, because we're moving now have moved in and out of this back to the office or not. So has anybody else got any experiences they're happy to share with everybody?
Monique's got her hand up.
Yeah, I think just what I've seen with my team, and even now going back into the office or not going back into the office and sort of having the, you know, people in the office and people at home, seeing that people's priorities have changed. And again, going back to the last 2 years and what we've all, I think, seen with our teams and understood or had to understand where there's been something different, if someone seems a bit stressed or distracted, or, you know, it's picking up on those signs as well, and just trying to empathise and, you know, understand what they're going through, because, you know, some people have kids, other people don't have kids, you know, and there's all sort of chaos. So, and it's not a one size fits all. And so it's also having the ability to, you know, sort of say, well, if you need time to go and do pick up or drop off, we're all adults. So you manage your own work time. And as long as the work gets done, you're not kept to, you know, 8:30 till 5 or, you know, 9 till 5:30. It's giving or empowering them to basically say, you know, we know we've got to get this done. You manage your own time, do what you need to do, and just being more flexible with how you manage the team and you're into it and interact with the team. And it's, you know, oh, I've got to drop the kids off. I'll be in the car on the, you know, I'll be in the car on the way or on the way back. And it's like, yep, that's fine. So just being a little bit more flexible as opposed to previously being so rigid that, you know, you've got to be on time, keep your phone on mute, you know, all of these things. So it's just, yeah, being a bit more understanding around the different, I suppose, the different way that we now are all working. So, because some people really struggled at, you know, I mean, personally, I've worked from home, clearly not for that period of time, but, you know, when you're dealing with different time zones, you've got to be home and taking calls late at night. So, you know, for me, it wasn't a huge struggle because I'd done it before, and it's just being able to switch off at the end of the day. The other thing too, I think, is that there's no longer parameters. So you don't have a fixed work day. So now if people go into the office, they're actually finding they leave the office at 5 and they're not working till 6 or 6:30 or 7 because they've left and then it's the home time. So it's also, you know, working with the team to say that's okay. I don't expect you to work until 7 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night. It can wait till tomorrow. It's just having that work-life balance, but the conscious work-life balance. If they want to come into the office Tuesday to Thursday, great. If it's 2 days a week, fine. You know, it's got to work for everyone.
Can I ask you a question, Monique? Did you start those conversations with your people about that you're okay with them having more flexibility, for example?
I did, because, you know, I've worked from home for a long period of time, but my approach has always been, I don't care if you work 2 hours or 5 hours, as long as the work gets done. But I think being at home for the time that we were, and some people were working, other people had different circumstances, there were different challenges, different worries. And I think I generally have one-on-ones with my team, and just picking up the differences. You know, after we got through work stuff, saying, are you okay? Is there anything else you wanted to raise? And, you know, I had one teammate, wife was a nurse, 2 young kids. So he really had to step up because there wasn't childcare, then there was childcare, then it was only for, you know, people like doctors and nurses, or I can't even think of the term now. What was it? Essential workers. Sorry, that's it. So for him, it was, you know, it was difficult because he had 2 young children, and it's like, that's okay. Do what you need to do. Family first. And then if there's anything I can help you with, because initially I think it was a bit of a struggle for him in regards to how does he raise this? You know, and it's like, I don't care. And then I sat down in the team meeting and just said, if you've got these things, do them. Just let me know, that's fine. And that sort of broke down the barriers. But creating a safe space, and especially doing it online or over Zoom, or, you know, I think that was a challenge for people too.
I'm interested to ask the group here, has anybody experienced resistance to them making those sort of leadership decisions because the policy of the organisation is different? Or does everybody feel comfortable as a leader? Just keen to know if there's a pushback on this from higher up and in any particular organisation.
I think, Christine, for us, it was more around resourcing, you know, our leaders around having those sorts of conversations. I think, you know, for seasoned campaigners, you know, who are probably have more empathy and it comes naturally to them, you know, they were more relaxed about having those conversations, where, you know, we also had some fairly new people managers, and some other leaders where, you know, that kind of style didn't come as naturally. You know, so as a leadership group, you know, we were really on the front foot about, you know, every week, you know, just checking in and you know, finding out what's going well in your team, what issues are you facing, what can we support you with, but also really, you know, role modelling that behaviour right at the top and sharing. And, you know, like we gave time back to people. So we said, right, every Friday afternoon, each fortnight, that's your time. You choose to do what you want with it. You know, whether that's time back with your family, whether it's going having a game of golf, whether it's to finish off a project, it's your time to do what you want with it. But, you know, for us, it was about, you know, consistency around regular communication, role modelling at the top. You know, we had our CEO talking about, you know, the struggles that he had. He's very introverted. He loves being around people, and he really, really struggled through this whole period because he couldn't be face to face with people. And, you know, so just sharing some of those really life stories coming through from the leadership, but also helping them kind of navigate, you know, what questions do you start with? You know, how do you actually be more empathetic and, you know, start that conversation, particularly you know, more so with the return to work and flexibility. You know, again, we knew that people were a little bit nervous about coming back. We also knew that some of our people, you know, had some real concerns with their own health and what that might mean. So again, we were just really on the forefront, and I think it really did start right with our leadership team around, you know, what was going to be our position. Why, how do we have these type of conversations? And all of our leaders went back and had individual conversations with their people around, tell us what flexibility means to you, you know, what's going to work first and foremost, and let's work out as a team, you know, what's important. But with some parameters around, you know, ideally, you know, for all our new people, we want them in the office for support and training. For team meetings and you know, training, we'd like to see people in the office once a week. But, you know, we've also got some people remote working as well. So, again, there were lots of things to thrash out, but, you know, it was about leading from the front and, you know, being able to have those honest conversations.
So were there any, like, couple of points that you would be able to share with the group here that say, like, if I was to say two things that you should say as you're approaching somebody that really we found work, can you share what those might be?
I think the question, particularly around flexibility, because that seems to be really topical, you know, it is around what does flexibility mean for you and your family? You know, and if there's one thing that we could do differently to help you out, what would that look like? And, you know, just really putting that right on the table and, you know, having those conversations with people really worked for us. You know, we did have some pushback, but, you know, it was also talking through, you know, there was three expectations that we had as an organisation. And one was around, you know, our new people in the business, training and development, and monthly communications meeting. We would love everyone to come in because that's our connection time. So, you know, there was a few things around certain expectations, but it was just talking through, you know, why and what was important about those sorts of things, but also ensuring that we really, really understood what individual needs people had.
What I liked about that messaging is not only what's important to you or what does flexibility look like to you, but to you and your family. It's very inclusive, and it really speaks to the human being and the human spirit, and really recognizing that you know, this is work and that's your family. So I think that just that difference in communication, those extra words, possibly connect you to a person more readily than the task and the job they're doing. Are there any other, Margaret, that you found that you tend to get when you've run sessions, people suggest, or that you would recommend asking?
Yeah, I think a good one to see, sometimes, you know, some employees are harder to connect with than others. When you say to them, oh, what do you and your family need? Some of them kind of might be hesitant about telling you because they feel vulnerable and they don't want to disclose. But I find that if you can break through and you can actually talk about something that was successful that they did in the past and say to them, oh, you were really successful with this particular client or this particular process, get into a situation where you can say, can you talk me through how that worked? And let them talk about something that's easy for them to talk about. So like a success that they've had at work and that they feel confident about. And then once you've connected on that, sometimes it can be a lot easier to take the conversation to the next level and ask them about something more personal, like, you know, what kind of flexibility do you need for your family? It's really moving, I think, with those people, moving from, you would have heard about transactional leadership and transformational leadership. And so the transactional side is just about like people come to work and they do this job and then they get paid this money. And when you have transactional meetings, you know, here's your task and this is how I did my task. And it's more about that. And it's about moving those conversations to things that are more transformational and around ideas and successes and how can we do these things and possibilities, and really engaging them in that way. So that's kind of the theory behind it. So move from having those transactional conversations to having something that's a little bit more transformational, like flexibility and like ideas and about success and those sorts of things. And I also really like that a few of you have talked about making it really individual as well. You know, I know we're obsessed with saying there's a rule for everyone. We're going to have this rule for, you know, everyone's going to work these hours and, you know, 9 to 5, and then we're not going to send emails outside those hours, which sounds great. But, you know, if you want to go and pick up your kids at 2:30 and be with your kids until 7:30, then get back online and work between 7:30 and 9:30 and do another 2 hours of work, and you're sending emails, then, you know, that doesn't fit in with this one kind of everyone work 9 to 5. So I think the individuality stuff is really important too. Yeah.
Excellent. And is there anybody else who wants to add a comment into this session, or should we move on now to the next section? We can. Okay. We can move on because we can have a chance for everyone to ask questions towards the end. So I'm going to move back to just sharing screen again now.
Yeah, and I think some of the connection stuff, once we've talked through the personal wellbeing stuff as well, I mean, all of these things are interlinked, and connecting through wellbeing is a big one. And so if we can improve our own wellbeing, this is a lovely forum to actually connect individually with team members and also connect your team together. So what I'm going to share here is, this gets onto this other piece where we were talking about wellbeing leaders build and model their own wellbeing with their team. And so I just want to talk through this little model I've got here that's around personal wellbeing. And there are 4 key elements first that pop up. So we've got mental health hygiene, knowing yourself, mind management, and connection. These are the 4 fundamental things that all human beings need to thrive. And these are the kinds of things that we need to check in with when we're checking ourselves on how we're going with our well-being. There's a 5th one here, and it's called conscious disconnection. And this takes into account the external world and our modern world and all of the pressures that the modern world puts on us. So those first 4 things, really, whether you were born in 1921 or 1950 or 1985, human beings still need that. We haven't evolved that much. The thing that's changed is the external world, and that's why we need that 5th element to kind of account for that. So I just want to step through these 5 elements. And the first one there is the mental health hygiene. And this is like your basics. This is your eating, your sleeping, and your moving. And if you're not doing these things right, you're going to be undermining everything else. Okay, so we need to check in with this stuff. This sort of stuff has been somewhat hijacked by commercialization and fashion and Instagram and that sort of thing, that when we move, like exercise, you need to have a personal trainer and you need to look like somebody on Instagram. But actually, the whole thing around the recommendation for movement is mostly around what it does for our mental health and our overall well-being. You don't have to necessarily go and get a personal trainer or anything like that, but movement is so important for both the proactive looking after our body, but also when we're feeling unwell, for example, suffering from a level of anxiety or depression. It has been shown that movement and just a walk every day is actually as effective for treating mild to moderate depression as does going and having talking therapy or counselling, as we know it. Okay, so movement is super important for our mental health and our overall well-being, aside from the whole thing about losing weight or building muscle. Okay, sleeping. We need to get 8 hours of sleep a day. It's just a fact. We can talk about the ins and outs of why we need that. If you're interested, I've actually got a book right here on my desk that I've been reading about why we sleep. If you read the first page of that, you'll know why. So what I would say to you is, let's just accept you need 8 hours of sleep. And if you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, my question to you is why? And that's what we need to address. So why are you not getting 8 hours of sleep? Is it because you're simply staying up too late? Is it because you can't go to sleep because you've got things flipping around in your mind connected to anxiety and ruminating on things that haven't happened or have happened? Is it because you're drinking a lot of coffee and eating a lot of sugar in the afternoon? Is it because you've had a heavy meal or you've been drinking alcohol in the evening and that's disturbing your sleep? Have you got sleep apnea? So if you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, you need to really face up to what's going on, and don't kid yourself that you can get away with less. You can't. The long-term effects and the short-term effects of lack of sleep is very well documented. So if you're not getting the 8 hours, ask yourself why and make a change. The other thing in there is about eating and about eating right. There's a lot of information out there about diets. I'm not going to give you particular diet information here now, but if you do need to, if you've got a medical condition or you need to lose weight or something like that, indeed, you need to go and see a professional and get a particular diet if you don't know what to eat. But if you don't have a particular condition, we know that you need to eat things that, lots of fresh vegetables and fruit, eat fish, lean protein, and things that aren't highly processed, things that aren't high in sugar. Because once again, you're kidding yourself if you think it's okay to eat those things. So pay attention to the basics. I know it's boring. I know I sound patronizing, but that's really, really important. The next one is around knowing yourself. And this is where getting in touch with your values, your purpose, your goals, your beliefs, and making sure that actually what you're doing on a day-to-day basis is aligned with those. Now, this is where we find joy, okay? If you're going through life and you're not experiencing joy, if it's hard to get out of bed every morning, and if you are feeling a little bit rudderless in life, that's probably out of kilter. You are probably not living your life aligned with your real values, and some of us are doing that because we were given our values from many years ago from our family, our school, our peer groups, and that sort of thing. And people can be living a life that's not actually aligned to what's important to them. Okay, so if you're finding it difficult to get out of bed because you're not motivated, if you feel like you're living a rudderless life, and if you're feeling like you're not experiencing joy every day, that could be the culprit. Everybody needs to be living a life that's aligned to what makes them happy, and that's what makes you happy. So that's important. There's a lot of work we can do around that. This third one here is around mind management. And I'm just going to talk through a few points about why this is so important. So mind management are these things like slowing our mind down, meditating, journaling, going for hikes. There are a multitude of activities that we can do to help calm and clear our minds. Now, the reasons this is so important, and it fascinates me that people don't think that this is so important, is when we can manage our mind, we can manage our life. We can understand ourselves, and we can live with intention. A lot of us go through life living life as a reaction. So we see something on social media, it makes us feel a certain way, and then we have a reaction to that. Something, anyway, we're not living with intention. Another one is around that stopping unhelpful thinking. And this is all about the lies that we tell ourselves, the negative thoughts that we tell ourselves, the assumptions that we make, and the labels that we put on ourselves. So when we undertake mind management, doing things like meditation, we can stop our unhelpful thinking, and that can really unlock new opportunities for us so that we can live life the way we want to live life. Reclaiming your calm. When we have all of this stuff flipping around in our heads, we cannot be present with our families. We can't sleep properly. We don't enjoy our activities because we're actually not present. So reclaiming our calm is about calming the mind so that you can do the things that you enjoy. And that last one is around clearing your mind for creativity and innovation. That's where your genius zone sits. When we can clear our mind and fully focus and get into that state of flow that you would have heard about, we can be highly productive, highly creative, and highly innovative. And that is where personal productivity sits. Okay, so that's all around that mind management piece. Connection. Now, this is super important. So technology and social media has given us this false impression that we are well connected, when in fact we know that we have a growing pandemic of loneliness in the Western world, including in Australia. And this is because people don't have genuine connections with things that are important, with things and people that are important to them. So the opposite of connection is loneliness. And we know that loneliness leads to things like depression, anxiety, alcohol and drug abuse, and suicide. So connection is one of those fundamental things that human beings need. We are not designed to be alone. We are not designed to live in an island. And I mean, this goes back to the old days when we lived in clans, in the primitive days when we lived in clans. And if you were turned out of the clan, your chances of survival were slim because you couldn't hunt on your own, or it was difficult to hunt on your own, or somebody else might attack you or steal your food and that sort of thing. So that primal instinct that we have to be part of a clan is still very much a part of the human being. And so connection and making sure that you are connected to the people that you need to be connected to and have a meaningful connection with those people is happening in your life. And that takes some effort, okay? The opposite of loneliness is not a good option. Now, those four things are the fundamentals that we need. This fifth thing down here about conscious disconnection is about facing up to some of the things that we're engaging in, usually things that are trying to relieve stress. We do these things usually because they're cathartic, but consciously disconnecting from the things that are hurting us. Okay, so drinking too much alcohol, gambling, overexposure to media and the wrong media, wasting time on social media, overuse of technology, poor food choices, toxic relationships. So shopping is another one. People over shopping. So these things in themselves, like drinking alcohol, I'm not going to tell you to give up give up drinking a glass of wine or anything. These things are a problem when they take you away from doing the things that you want to do, and they take you away from the people that you love. So if you're drinking wine in the evening instead of cooking a meal for your children and reading them books, well, then drinking alcohol is a problem. And sometimes it takes a lot of bravery to face up to the fact that these things are happening. And if you're doing them, why are you doing them? You know, why do people spend so much money on shopping? You know, buying clothing, buying shoes, reacting to what other people have, and so you go and buy it as well, that sort of thing. So when you're spending money that should be used for other things in your life, you know, taking your family on a holiday, say, I can't afford a holiday because we don't have, you know, I've spent money on clothing. You know, it's taking you away from the people and the things that you really want to do. So that conscious disconnection is something we really need to check in. That can be a little bit confronting sometimes. So they're the 5 things that I talk through when we're talking about personal well-being. And some of these things, you're probably looking at them going, oh, yes, I do that and I do that, and I'm not sure about that one, and maybe I need to do more of that. So I think it'd be really good if we could hear from you now about, you know, how can you build your own well-being, or what are those things that you feel that you really have checked in with well, that you do every day, or perhaps what's something that you could improve. How's that?
Here we go, back to the days of Teams and things when you're muting yourself all the time. Thank you, Margaret. I think, look, I'll be the first to admit when you look at that and go, do I scroll through messages and Facebook and everything else? Yes. Do I have a glass of wine some nights where really I'm tired, so it's actually falsely energizing me? Yes. Do I walk the dog for long enough in the morning? Not as much as I was doing. Did we have a great exercise once where Marshall McAdam set up and we're full of competitive people, and we were challenged to who could do the most steps, and so we were at our healthiest and most re-energized when we did that, not when we were having Friday afternoon drinks. So it is a real refresher and reminder. But I think the reason we wanted to focus on this now is that if you don't look after yourself, how can you look after your other people? How can you look after the people in your life around your family, and how can you look after your work people? And so this actually applies to you thinking about them, just having a look at them. Are they tired all the time, maybe overindulging in things? I don't know. So I think it's all very relevant and to the point, and some things you might not want to admit to. But Monique, you've got your hand up, so I will ask you to unmute and join in.
I think I think especially when COVID started, everybody I knew became a degenerate gambler and an alcoholic, because everyone made sure they had all their, you know, racing apps up to date. And, you know, we do Saturday race day because in Victoria nobody could go, you know, past 5Ks. And, you know, so nationally, friends, we would do a race day. And everybody would have a drink, and then after a little while, like, oh my God, this is every Saturday. This is, you know, it's getting out of hand. And what we all did is we went and bought or got gifted Apple Watches. What are they? Apple, the iWatch or whatever it is, Apple Watch. And then we all started setting up challenges. So we'd start exercising and doing things like that. So it sort of went from, you know, one extreme to another.
That's a huge extreme, one extreme to another, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, don't worry, the first extreme lasted a while, but, you know, and I'm not saying that we all became...
We had a few lockdowns to get through, so it was, I think it was become acceptable to day drink, I felt. And I'm a mother with 3 children, and I was there, so I had to nip that in the bud. First lockdown, mind you, it was. I think we were all a bit shocked what was going on here.
Yeah, but then it sort of, you know, changed. And then what I'd start doing with the team, we'd set up time once a week and that was time to talk about anything. If we wanted to talk about work stuff, that was fine. If we wanted to talk about other things, that was okay too. And they were actually, twice a week, a Monday and a Thursday, just to see how everybody's weekend was. And if you could make it, great. If you had a meeting and you didn't make it, that was fine. But the other thing too was also and going back to mindfulness and well-being, if it was a beautiful day, I'd be like, make sure you get out for half an hour. Put half an hour in your calendar, get out in the sunshine, walk within your 5Ks, or we can do the one-on-ones while you're going for a walk, or we can both go for a walk. So it was just trying to work around that, just make sure that people did get out of the house, because otherwise, with the factors that they were facing internally, it was just, having that 30 minutes outside to get into the fresh air and breathe and things like that.
Yeah, that's good. It's and when you're actually building your own well-being and you're actually working on these things, and you can start having conversations with your people about it. I will, on a Friday, if you've had a really challenging week, plenty of times very easy to say, well, I think I might just go home and drink a bottle of Jack Daniels and stay in bed all weekend and watch Netflix. I don't drink Jack Daniels. I drink wine. That's just an example. But if you say that to your team, then they think that that's a norm. Whereas if you say it's been such a rough week, I think I might go home and get some takeaway, and on the weekend, I think I might go for a hike, or, and get some friends over for dinner on Saturday night, and do positive things like that. If you tell your people that and make jokes about excessive drinking, or, lying on the couch all weekend, getting Uber Eats and watching movies or whatever, they're going to think that they're going to do that too. It's natural role modeling. So talking about things like you were saying, Monica, and doing challenges together or doing things together, that's really powerful. And when you're the leader and you're doing that, it has profound effects and people get involved. So that's why it's so important.
Something that I've been exploring, and I'm just starting on this journey, is purpose-driven leadership. So really trying to work out, what my individual purpose is. And I think kind of the catalyst for that was that I moved to another country. I left a place I'd worked at for a long time, and I'm in the process of looking for a new job and a new role. And that really gave me an opportunity to think about my purpose and how I wanted to look for a job in perhaps a different industry that better suits my individual purpose. And I'm, like I said, I'm very early in the process, but I'm finding it really interesting. And I've had a conversation with a few other leaders who are also, thinking about purpose.
Purpose is huge. And that's great that's something that you're looking into now. That can be a real driver for well-being.
Yes.
And like I said, when you're on purpose, you genuinely experience high levels of joy in your life. Yeah. Good on you, Veris. Good luck with that.
Thanks.
It must be the most common thing that senior leaders are saying to me, is really looking for a role with purpose, looking to contribute, which is fabulous for the organisations that need that expertise. It really is. But as you say, Margaret, hopefully that helps individuals think about their purpose in their role and what they're actually contributing to any business. I think it's maybe a thing to ask your team members. What do they enjoy? I remember interviewing one person once, and so she said, I'm leaving this role because I'm not as enthusiastic as the 3 new people I've just brought into the team, and I want that enthusiasm back for me. And so it was a motivation for that person to change. But it doesn't always have to be about changing outside of the company either. It can be about finding new purpose in the role and environment you're in, or in a new leadership role.
Yeah.
But it is really common.
Yeah. And purpose doesn't have to be connected to your job either. you can find purpose in other ways. And purpose doesn't have to be like, you know, I'm going to save the world and for, you know, world peace or solve the poverty problem or something like that. It can be quite simple. It can be about being a great parent or being a senior leader in your family, you know, those sorts of things. My purpose in life, I've got two key things that well, probably three key things that I want to do. Two are really around family. And I'm lucky that one of my purposes is to spread messages about wellbeing in workplaces so that workplaces can take a step toward becoming places of well-being. And so when I wake up in the morning, I'm actually, it's quite easy for me to get out of bed, even if I'm tired, but I'm getting out of bed for something worthwhile. And I just want that for everyone, really. It's motivational. It's motivational and it's joyful. So I encourage you to think about purpose.
So I'm doing this again. Has anybody else got anything any thoughts they'd like to share? Who have we not heard from? Not heard from you, Melinda. You're off video at the moment. Or Felicity. Anybody like to join us?
Hi, Christine. It's Mel Corby here from Armaguard. How are you?
Hi, Mel. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Look, I was just thinking in the conversation, it's moved on a little bit, but just a little bit before when you were talking about those conscious disconnects, Margaret, I, like many people, found myself having a lot of wine during lockdown. And I did some reading and research afterwards about moderation, not wholly giving up. But one of the phrases that there's a lady called Annie Grace she has a book called The Naked Mind, and she says, when you find that it starts taking more from you than what it's giving, then you need to pause. So all of those items that you had there about whether it's drinking or shopping or all of those things, when you find yourself feeling more negativity around it than the positivity you're getting for it. And that really resonated with me. That was a really good indicator of, oh, well, hang on. And that applies to many things that I can look at. I don't think shopping, Margaret. I don't know if you've got that right, but
shopping's great. I love shopping too.
But definitely, like it's a phrase that really worked for me that I'd recommend sharing and applying to things that you're starting to worry about. You're going, am I still getting more from it than it's taking from me? Then
well, that's right. And if you're spending money shopping or spending time shopping when you should actually be spending that time and money on something else, other people or your family or other things that bring you joy, then it's time to reassess, isn't it? Yeah.
If your gaming is not relaxing you as much as what you're actually taking yourself away from, which is causing other pain, then it applies to so many things. It's such a good phrase. So I just
good barometer, isn't it? Yeah. I'm just interested if anyone looking at that model, was there anything on that model that you thought, oh, I don't pay attention to that, like the mind management thing or the connection thing? No,
I think it resonated with a lot of people. Francoise, were you about to say something?
Well, it's not about the individual things of the model, but one of the reflections that I've had, listening through the very excellent conversation is just whether the model refines itself or changes for leadership teams versus team members. Because I think organizational expectations are quite different. And a lot of the time leaders are caught in the middle. So in my team, as I'm sure has been the case elsewhere, we had the gamut of emotions of people who hated lockdown and felt it was a fascist state that was keeping us barred, through to people who were really fearful and terrified and still are probably terrified of leaving the house. And so no organizational position was right. And then that, translates to return to workplace and 100 other things where leaders are trying to balance actually having a viable business at the end of it and supporting their teams in their very different emotional kind of states. And I was just reflecting as to the point on role modeling, well-being, which was, I think, point 4 of the original model, which is that's for the leaders as opposed to the individual. And I'm just wondering what the lens would be, or if, Margaret, you've got any thoughts on what the specific well-being for leaders might be as opposed to team members.
I'm going to give you an answer. I don't know if you're going to like this answer very much. When I'm looking at well-being of people, and on that model shows all of the fundamental things that every human being needs. So whether you're a leader, whether you're unemployed, whether you're a stay-at-home mum, or whether you're an employee, as the commonality of human beings and humanness and humanity, I would say all of those things are important for every person. If we were going to start, I mean, you've got to have all of that before you can be a good leader. Yeah, so that model is really a model about humans and what human beings need to thrive. So it's relevant no matter what position you're in an organisation. Does that make sense? I hope that's...
It does make sense, in the sense that at the general level, I absolutely get that everyone needs that. But I think that there are certain roles, and I'm not saying it's just leader roles. I think people who work in emergency services, for example, have different pressures on them. People who work in retail, where you don't have a choice to work from home, you have to get out, you're exposed all the time. And leaders are just a different category of that. It's not about hierarchy or position, it's just different, where the pressures and demands of the role are just different. And so how do you find those things from the general model based on the work that you do? I think that's the difference, and that's the bit which I need to reflect on, because you can't say to, people who work in retail. I have a daughter who works in retail. Well, if you don't feel that you can be flexible, work from home, it's all good. You can't. That's not the job.
Oh no, that's right.
So I think that's the difference, which is some jobs have more flexibility, some jobs have less, some jobs are more demanding, some jobs are less. How do you fulfill that human model, depending on what your personal context is? Work context, I don't mean human context.
Yeah. So that person, it's highly personal. What your version of personal well-being is like is highly personal, and for every person on this call will be different. And that's the journey we all need to go on about your personal well-being, and then finding what works for you from a work perspective is going to be different for every person too. So do you know what I'm meaning? So I think that particular model is really a very base model from which we can all check ourselves against and design our own version of well-being. Because to some people, everyone's connection is going to look different. The right mental health hygiene balance is going to be different for everyone. What works for one in terms of mind management, so some people like to swim 2Ks in the ocean, some people like to meditate. So it's very different, whatever it's going to be. But what I encourage people to do is check yourself against all of those points and just make sure you're covering them off in some way that works for you. So your version of well-being should be really comfortable for you. It might take a little while and a little bit of discipline to turn some of the habits around, but after a while your disciplines become habits, and they become very comfortable, and you can't do without them. And so that well-being becomes something that you love, and you feel very comfortable when you've nailed your own version of well-being. So it's very different for each other, for one another.
Is that framework something that you would recommend people share with their people and say, look at this, this is where, when I look at you and talk to you, a question, or do you think, can it be used in that way?
You mean the personal model or the leadership model, or
the more personal model of just to encourage conversation?
Yeah, that model suits every human being. Suits 95-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 45-year-olds. Yeah. So that model, those 4 things in particular, they are the fundamental things that human beings need to thrive. And that's why they're on the model. And that last bit is the conscious disconnection to try and control or manage some of the things that this external world puts upon us. So I think I said before, I'll just say it again. So people haven't really evolved. If you were born in 1950, you're not really different. Well, you're not different from the human being born in 2022. Human beings are the same. The thing that's changed is our environment. So we still need the same things to thrive, and those are the 4 things: the mental health hygiene, the value, the purpose, the mind management, and the connection. That's what human beings need.
I absolutely hear what you're saying, Margaret, and I absolutely agree. But I think where I am on that spectrum, because I'm older, wiser, more experienced, and I've probably learned by hard knocks, is probably very different to what I would probably think at 20.
Yeah, absolutely. You would be different. Yeah, definitely. Everyone's well-being and what works for you is different from the next person, but they are the key elements that you need. And you know what a 20-year-old finds cathartic in terms of mind management is going to be quite different from a 53-year-old woman. And it changes, and your personal version of well-being will evolve as you go through life.
Yeah, I think to Lynn's point though too is we're more resilient. I suppose growing up a generation different. So, and I'll just use a simple example, catching 2 trains to school, whereas now it's like, oh, Mum, you have to drive me, or can I get an Uber? Do you know what I mean? So it's...
They're living in a different world.
Red rattler or a blue rattler, and and yes, your parents would trust you not to open the doors and fling yourself out of it because, you're expected to behave and listen to adults.
Yes.
I think it is all about, just as we kind of bring this to a close today, a lot of this is about human connection and taking the time to stop, listen, ask questions, but actively listen. What are your people saying to you? What are you seeing and hearing and thinking about that? And we're in yet again a different stage of this whole evolution. From our side, we've been talking to businesses about obviously that pivot to working from home, and then I suppose that work-life balance and hybrid working. And now, as I think Francois mentioned earlier, it's all about flexibility. The whole conversation is around flexibility to suit the individual and the business and the role, and finding that balance. And it comes back to a leadership-led conversation at all levels. But you're also right, Francois, we in talking to businesses, we're seeing a disconnect between what the leaders have in terms of autonomy to do compared with what a group remit and direction and strategy is. Excuse me, and that's causing some of the disconnect with people and some of that attrition challenge that we see and hear every day that organisations are facing. And as usual, it often comes back to human connection and communication, but it's something that's fallen a little by the way with this whole virtualisation and change from just being with each other. But don't get me wrong, I live in Torquay, so I'm happy to have days not in the office with everybody. So it's still finding a balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is really interesting though, because it is, it is the small things that matter. And it's really interesting we ran September this year through the COVID period, and we did it as an exercise to continue to connect with people. But it was really interesting where one of our senior leaders shared their story about, the importance that exercise alone meant to him individually. So he lived on his own. And, to be part of a team, and one of his colleagues was in the same area. So they did September together, walking around the parks, in that 5K radius. And that's probably the biggest thing that meant, a huge amount of value, because it got him out of the house, it got him seeing people, it got him exercising, similar to what you're talking about there with Margaret with your model. But it's just, and like, I wouldn't have known that, but it was simply because he wanted to share his story about how much that meant to him and his own well-being through that period. And it was just a small thing that we did, but it meant so much. So, I think, any of these sort of activities and connection points that, you can make through your leaders and with your people just mean a lot. Yeah. And for some, much more than you actually think.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's all about the leaders leading. But there's some areas where development and support of leaders helps. And that's what we're hoping to do today, just start the conversation, get people thinking about these things still, keep it on radar and on agenda. So thank you very much, Margaret. That was a really great presentation, and nice and bright and cheerful. And that's what we need to see as well, is some positive imagery around and out there. And I think this year, like all, is proving to have its own challenges, but look, we can all remain hopeful and positive about outcomes and hopefully positive change, which is good. So thank you everyone for joining in. There's a lot of faces of people that I haven't caught up with yet this year, and I will reach out to you in the next week or two, and hopefully we can just have a conversation. And for some people, unfortunately, Beres, you and I are on virtual connection just for a while, although I may be heading to New Zealand when I can, so I'll let you know.
You must let me know, yeah.
I will do. I think it's April the 13th we're allowed at the moment, so it's on its way.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Keep in touch, and we'll let you know when the next event is soon. And take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.